The Carol Burnett Show's Harvey Korman was earning $25,000 per episode in 1973. Everything went wrong at that point. He began to act totally out of control, spoil scenes, and ignore Tim Conway's humor. Carol saw her own show fail due to the actions of one man. Carol took up the phone and made a call that altered everything after Harvey slammed a door in her face. She dismissed him right away. What Harvey did next, however, was even more unexpected. You will be shocked by the true story. On April 26, 1933, Carol Burnett was born in San Antonio, Texas. Her mother was a studio PR writer, while her father was a movie theater employee. They both aspired to be writers, but their excessive drinking derailed their plans. By the time Carol was a young child, their drinking had led to arguments, divorces, and extreme poverty. Her father lost his work and vanished for extended periods of time. He passed away alone in a charity hospital in 1954 at the age of 46. After years of drinking and losing her temper, her mother also passed away in 1958 at the age of 46. Carol recalled how her mother would yell at her while intoxicated and accuse her of inexplicable things. Even when intoxicated, her father was kind. She was frightened by the pandemonium at home, but she channeled her fear into creativity. She later claimed that she was hilarious because of the agony. She wrote in 1986 about her mother telling her that regardless of appearance, one can always write. Although it was painful, Carol used that anguish to create humorous sketches. Carol and her grandmother relocated to a dilapidated Hollywood boarding house on Yucca Street in 1940 when Carol was 7 years old. They had to use the restroom down the hall because there was only one room and no kitchen or bathroom. Because they couldn't afford necessities, they occasionally stole toilet paper from movie theaters to make ends meet on $30 a month from assistants. Up to the age of 21, Carol slept on a tiny couch. Since there was no closet, they hung their clothes from the shower rod. Nevertheless, despite everything, she sang at the kitchen table with her music-loving grandma. Carol's voice evolved from there. She was able to perform her well-known Tarzan yell by the age of 9. Actors, playwrights, musicians, and other impoverished dreamers made up the building's occupants. Thus, a peculiar sort of hope existed despite suffering. When she was just 5 years old, her parents divorced in the late 1930s. Her mother went on drinking binges for days, and her father disappeared entirely. Carol was largely left in the care of her grandma. She started making up stories while she was alone. In the second grade in 1940, she even created a twin sister named Karen. She would pretend to be Karen, change into new clothes, and go up the fire escape. She let Karen go because she was exhausted from the game. She utilized movies as an escape when she had no toy. Even more instability was introduced when her mother had another daughter, Chrissy, from an affair a few years later in 1944. Carol enrolled at UCLA after graduating from Hollywood High in 1951 thanks to an enigmatic $50 contribution. Despite her fear of becoming like her mother, she was resolved to change the trend. Those sloppy recollections were turned into amusing routines for her show years later. Something happened around 1945 when she was around 12. That remained in her memory forever. On Hollywood Boulevard, she discovered her mother unconscious and babbling. People stared as they passed. She was troubled by that moment. Her mother never succeeded in her repeated attempts to sober up. She would yell, smash bottles, and make false accusations against Carol. In her 1981 court testimony, Carol described her mother as a hostile alcoholic. Erin, her own daughter, later struggled with addiction as well. Following 8 rehab stays and a 2020 suicide attempt, Carol was forced to take custody of her grandson Dylan. It was like seeing a reenactment of history. She discussed these habits and how they made it more difficult for her to abstain from alcohol and use her suffering in her humor in her 1986 memoir. Between 1941 and 1945, during World War II, Carol and her grandmother lived in abject poverty. They would live off of government cheese and scrounge for food. Their only means of escape became movies. They repeatedly viewed movies like Gone with the Wind for 25 cents. Carol particularly enjoyed playing the role of Scarlett O'Hara. She would dream of performing on stage while seeing 3 films a week. Because they couldn't buy their own toilet paper, they would occasionally bring it home from the cinemas. They would sit in the dark and sing harmonies to help them relax during the 1943 blackouts. Those were the years she first dreamed of being on Broadway. She was given a $1,000 loan to relocate to New York in 1954 by a person she hardly knew. She departed amid Hurricane Carol, a tempest as untamed as her own life, and that sum of money altered everything. In the late 1940s, Carol attended Hollywood High School, which she completed in 1951. Despite being teased for wearing used clothing and living in substandard conditions, she participated in school plays. She was once encouraged by a teacher who witnessed her behavior. She was altered by that. She overcame her shyness and began to think she could make people laugh. She still shared a room with her grandmother. Still dreaming, still impoverished. Every week, they used movies as an escape. These early days of suffering combined with humor were the inspiration for all of the characters she later developed for her show. Around 1949, when Carol was 16, she made a startling discovery. In order to continue receiving welfare payments, her mother had misrepresented her age. During a furious dispute in their small room, this was revealed. Carol felt as though she couldn't put her trust in anyone. They survived on their $50 monthly relief handouts, but fear and falsehoods kept things together. Nevertheless, she persisted, seeking for scholarships and attempting to remain optimistic. She concentrated on journalism and graduated with honors. Years later, she again discussed this treachery in her book. It gave her fire, yet it ached like hell. Carol made only 65 cents an hour as an usher at the Warner Brothers Theater in the early 1950s. She barely made ends meet while living in a studio with her grandma for $30 a month. She would sneak back inside the theater to watch Lucille Ball's comedies after her shifts. She committed them to memory. She learned how to be humorous without speaking by observing Lucy's timing and body language. On one occasion, she was discovered allowing someone to watch a movie twice. Nevertheless, she charmed her way out rather than being afraid. Her tuition at UCLA was covered by those menial jobs, which brought her maybe $20 a week. They gave her a route, though, more than money. She collaborated with Lucille Ball on television years later. Alongside her idol, the girl who had stolen toilet paper now made people laugh. She began attending UCLA on a journalism scholarship in 1951. That unidentified $50 donation enabled her to pay for tuition, which was only $43 per semester. She was silent and uncertain at first. She was then informed she belonged in theater by a professor in 1952 after he saw her act in class. Everything changed in that instant. She discovered her voice and changed her major. She performed a skit about putting cookies in her purse at a party in 1954, and a $1,000 loan was provided to her. There are no conditions. After starring in school musicals such as South Pacific, she earned an associate's degree in the arts from UCLA. Her 1953 notes, which are still in existence, demonstrate how swiftly she overcame her phobia. Living was difficult even in those years. Due to their inability to pay for it, Carol and her grandmother stole toilet paper from movie theaters during the 1940s and 1950s. Food and hygiene were not covered by their $50 welfare checks. Carol would slip rolls into her suitcase at the Warner Brothers Theater. She faced a $100 punishment if caught. Additionally, they shared scraps and ate leftover chicken. Although it was embarrassing, it helped her to comprehend others. She later created sketches based on those recollections. Like her parody of a toilet paper commercial from the 1970s, gold was created out of what was once disgrace. She used that anonymous $1,000 loan to move to New York in 1954 after leaving UCLA. For $9 per night, she initially stayed at the Algonquin Hotel, but her funds quickly ran out. The Rehearsal Club, a low-cost boarding house for ladies attempting to succeed in show business, gave her a place. Food was included in the $18 weekly rent. She auditioned whenever she could and worked odd jobs like hat check girl. She repeatedly called home in tears, but she decided to press on after hearing about Hurricane Carol in the news. She received her first break in 1955 when she dated a ventriloquist dummy on the Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney show. Stars like Celeste Holm attended her performance at the Rehearsal Club Review that same year. There wasn't easy at first, but there was a tiny glimmer in the dark. Rejections were common in the middle of the 1950s. She was deemed too unglamorous by the directors. She even considered taking her own life since she felt like a failure. Her mother passed away in 1958, which devastated her, but she continued to perform. Before the term viral was coined, one of her parodies, "I made a fool of myself over John Foster Dulles," became viral. Even Dulles laughed about it when it appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and The Tonight Show. In The Tonight Show, she was about to give up, but that moment stopped her. Everything changed when she was discovered by talent scouts at the Blue Angels Supper Club in 1960. It wasn't until 1955 that she made her major breakthrough, as some people believe. It was with Once Upon a Mattress in 1959. Her physical comedy, which included somersaults and climbing ladders, earned her the nickname Clown Princess for her portrayal as Princess Winifred. With 244 performances, the off-Broadway production brought in over $500,000. She received a Tony nomination in 1960 after it moved to Broadway. She later performed versions on television in 1964, 1972, and even 2005. She was accepted after that one performance. She survived on $18 a week when she was in New York. To make ends meet in 1957, she and her roommate divided tips at a tea room. She once passed out from hunger during rehearsal. She wasn't receiving enough protein, according to a doctor. It brought up memories of being afraid, hungry, and impoverished at the age of 7. However, she continued. She developed the Carol Burnett Show as a result of that similar suffering, which earned 25 Emmys and ran from 1967 to 1978. CBS stated that 10 million Americans were undernourished in 1968. Understood the sensation of that. She had experienced it. She began making TV appearances by 1957. She performed her spoof songs on The Ed Sullivan Show and The Tonight Show. Each episode of her impressions attracted 20 million people. She joined The Gary Moore Show in 1959 and made more than 300 appearances. When everything changed, Carol Burnett was only 26 years old. She made her stage debut as Princess Winifred in the musical comedy Once Upon a Mattress on May 11, 1959, at the Phoenix Theater. People couldn't stop raving about her performance since it was so energetic and chaotic, even though it started off Broadway. The production then moved to Broadway's Alvin Theater, where it continued for 470 performances. No one anticipated that this unknown girl would shine so brightly, but Carol's appeal was undeniable. She discreetly paid back a strange $1,000 loan that she had previously taken out to travel to New York the same year. She fulfilled the pledge she had made to do so. She had little money, balancing part-time TV jobs, but this play made her famous and even earned her a Tony Award nomination. However, behind the scenes, not everything was happy. Carol and George Abbott, the director, had a falling out because she continued incorporating her own flair into the performance. He was enraged by her exaggerated scenes, particularly her swampy, untidy arrival. They had a lot of arguments, and she once came dangerously close to losing her job. After more than a year in the role, Ann B. Davis finally took over in June 1960 while the production toured between 4 separate locations. It was hardly a tidy farewell. She was worn out, underpaid, and surrounded by crew and cast changes all the time. Carol, however, discovered the harshness of Broadway during that pandemonium, and she found her own voice as well. When she received her first Emmy in 1962 for her work on The Gary Moore Show, her voice became more heard. With her monthly sketches that made millions of people laugh, she had been a fixture of the show since 1959. Carol's own grandmother, who used to clean while daydreaming about earlier times, served as the inspiration for one of those characters, the charwoman, a melancholy yet endearing cleaner. She portrayed the character in more than 30 episodes because it became so popular. At about the same time, she co-starred with Julie Andrews in the Carnegie Hall musical spectacular Julie and Carol, which took home even more honors. But she was in pain behind the spotlight. That year, her first marriage ended, and in 1965, she had a heartbreaking miscarriage in private. She continued to perform nevertheless, even while she was experiencing heartbreak. She made her big screen debut in the comedy Who's Minding the Store with Jerry Lewis in 1964. Despite the film's success at the box office, she only received $10,000 for playing the eccentric love interest. Jerry Lewis made more than 10 times that amount. Carol was inspired to fight for women's rights in show industry by this injustice, which lingered in her memory. In addition to making people laugh, she was juggling a system that did not treat women fairly after being married to producer Joe Hamilton the previous year. Her initial marriage had been challenging. In 1955, while they were both young and impoverished in New York, she wed Don Soroyan. Don became resentful as Carol's notoriety increased, despite the fact that they had shared the $1,000 loan that had brought her to the city. Things were collapsing by 1960. She was becoming a star while he was making little, unmemorable movies. In 1962, they formally separated and got divorced. It was a sad and public separation. Carol got back up after having to conceal food in her backpack to survive. She married Joe Hamilton, the man who would influence her most significant career decision within a year. September 11th was the date of that transfer. When she demanded her own variety program in 1967, CBS execs were shocked. She discovered an outdated provision in her 1962 contract that stated the network owed her $250,000 or a show. They didn't think she was capable of hosting a variety program. Carol refused to back down from what was perceived as a man's game. She became the owner of her own show. Each week, she participated in humorous routines that parodied soap operas and daily life while also responding to audience queries. People adored it. In its debut season, the show had an average viewership of 18 million. However, it wasn't simple. In an attempt to make it fail, CBS pushed it into unfavorable time slots. They even urged that she make her style more sexy because they didn't like it. She should add more spice or wear shorter skirts, one executive advised. However, she declined. On October 15, 1967, she was on the verge of giving up, but the daily inflow of more than 1,200 admirer letters gave her the willpower to continue. Early on, there were issues with the show. Budgets were slashed, ratings were poor, and strikes in 1968 caused a 3-month delay in production. Carol persisted, though. When the team wasn't getting paid, she even gave them $500 bonuses with her own money. The audience grew to more than 20 million by 1969. In a world where just 2 female-led shows even made it through that decade, she had proven everyone wrong. She carefully considered her cast before taking a chance on Vicki Lawrence, a 19-year-old admirer in 1967. Vicki's resemblance to Carol was ideal for skits about a chaotic, noisy family. Actors like Tim Conway and Lyle Waggoner joined the cast over time. Tim frequently deviated from the script, which led to mayhem and late tapings because everyone was laughing too much. Although he frequently quarreled on set, Harvey Korman was another important actor. Carol made an effort to maintain harmony by providing modest incentives to boost morale. The chemistry worked. Despite the simmering conflicts beneath the surface, the cast received several honors. Stars also attended the show. When Darewood Kirby arrived in 1967 and attempted to alter the script, there was a 2-hour standoff until Carol transformed the situation into a funny improv segment. For 10 minutes in 1969, Jerry Lewis entirely deviated from the script, almost destroying the recording. Carol, however, always managed to transform chaos into enchantment. She gained notoriety for her iconic curtain rod attire from the 1976 parody of Gone with the Wind, and it had only taken 2 days to assemble. Some visitors received lower pay, particularly women. Additionally, the show was being sued for rights and credit by 1972. However, the show continued to go well. The program eventually took home an Emmy for Outstanding Variety Series in Season 3 of 1969. Carol was still prohibited from directing, though. Managers believed that women couldn't oversee a staff of 50 men. Nevertheless, she used fictitious aliases to direct 3 episodes. CBS asked her $1 million to quit that same year because they were worried that her success would challenge conventional wisdom. She declined. Before ending in 1978, the show continued to flourish and won 25 Emmys. At that time, Carol was still fighting sexism, running one of the most popular television programs, and raising her daughter Carrie, who was born in 1963. It began as a fantasy when she married Joe Hamilton, who helped create her show. Together they had 3 daughters, Erin in 1968, Jody in 1967, and Carrie in 1963. However, Hamilton's drinking eventually became a significant issue. Carol's parents were alcoholics when she was growing up. Her father was kind, although he was alcoholic. And when she drank, her mother turned nasty. It felt like she was reliving her worst childhood memories as she went through that again, this time with her husband. Their marriage was failing by the late 1970s. In 1984, they got divorced. Rumor had it that husband had cheated on her, leaving her to manage her show and public life while raising the girls by herself. She was falsely accused of being intoxicated in public by the National Enquirer in 1981. She donated the $1. $6 million she received from her lawsuit to a charitable organization. Money wasn't the only factor in that victory. It has to do with honor. Her daughter Carrie started taking cocaine, marijuana, and Quaaludes in 1976 when she was just 13 years old. Carol had to defend her kid. By the time she was 17, she had sent her to rehab 3 times. Carrie was warned of a fatal destiny by a doctor who likened her life to that of Janis Joplin. Everything changed in that instant. After sobering up in 1980, Carrie and her mother went on to co-write plays, transforming suffering into something lovely. But disaster struck once more. Died at the age of 38 from cancer in 2002. She began smoking when she was a teenager, and the illness quickly progressed, first to her brain and then to her lungs. Carol was broken. After Carrie's passing, the play they had just finished writing together, which was based on Carol's early years, had its debut. Later, Carol published their letters and their intense love in her book, Carrie and Me. Even though the loss was severe, she managed to make it light for others. Something unexpected rocked one of America's most popular comedy programs in 1973. Harvey Korman, the typically witty and endearing regular on the Carol Burnett Show, began to behave entirely differently behind the scenes. He arrived at a rehearsal dressed like Elvis Presley, but his demeanor was devoid of humor. He yelled at his fellow actors. He spoiled situations, disregarded Tim Conway's ad-libs, and even made Petala Clark, the guest star, feel awkward. She nearly walked away. Members of the crew whispered that he was losing control. Carol Burnett, who had always been a loving leader, was shocked by what she was witnessing. Later on, she said that his actions caused her to repeatedly mispronounce her own lines during filming. Then the tipping point arrived. After yet another stressful practice one November afternoon, Carol made her way directly to Harvey's dressing room. Harvey, still in his jumpsuit and Elvis wig, had no desire to converse. "Mind your own business," he said. She persisted in her attempt to clarify how his behavior was detrimental to everyone. Harvey, however, was unconcerned. With such force that the neighboring props rocked, he slammed the door in her face. It was heard by those down the hall. Stunned, Carol simply stood there. She hadn't had a serious altercation like that in 7 seasons until now. She didn't hold off. She picked up the phone and dialed Harvey's agent immediately after lunch. She responded, calmly but firmly, that he was fired, with effect from the moment of the filming that evening. She clarified that being impolite to cast members and visitors was more than just being unprofessional. It contradicted all of the show's values. Harvey, who at the time was earning $25,000 per episode, abruptly quit. Since 1967, he had been a part of the show, but suddenly it was finished. Not for long, though. Carol personally broke the news to him that same evening after the episode wrapped up filming. And then something was different. Harvey's expression fell. Now, almost in a panic, the man who had just slammed the door on her a few hours before apologized. "What can I do to stay?" he said. Carol put him to the test, returned the following Monday whistling, smiling, and being polite to everyone. Although she didn't expect he would, Harvey didn't just show up on Monday. He bounded down the corridor, whistled like a schoolboy, and danced into her office. They were back in no time after he gave her a firm embrace. The incident turned into a humorous recollection between them. To remind him, Carol even hung a plaque that read Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky on his dressing room. It was successful. On set, the atmosphere improved. More people grinned. Arguments ceased. Later, Harvey claimed that his firing had transformed him. The sketches only improved during his 5 more years on the show. Took on a role that no one had anticipated in 1982, a few years after the show's conclusion. In Annie, she turned into Miss Hannigan, the cruel and inebriated leader of the orphanage. People were amazed at how skillfully she executed the change, which was a significant departure from her endearing TV persona. Most people were unaware that she had recently undergone jaw surgery while filming. Despite the fact that her face was still swollen and that she was scarcely able to speak, she walked up wearing bandages and gave her lines while attempting to contain her laughter. Carol received a Golden Globe nomination, and the film earned over $57 million. She made news once more, this time in court in 1990. According to a 1976 gossip piece, she had gotten wasted at a restaurant. Henry Kissinger and I had a disagreement. It was all untrue. Carol, who had dedicated her life to advocating against alcoholism, didn't even drink. The National Enquirer was sued then. It was dangerous. She was the only celebrity to win such a case. Her $1.06 million award from a jury was eventually lowered in a settlement. The lawsuit altered the way tabloids covered celebrities. Carol created history in addition to defending her reputation. After 30 years away, she made a comeback to Broadway in 2003 with Moon Over Buffalo, where she received a Tony nomination. However, the plot was not fully shown by the stage lighting. She had endured excruciating pain from a cruel jaw condition back in the 1980s. She had to use a straw to drink at one point. She had endured that suffering for years, but for some reason, she never showed it on stage. Even though it was painful to move her jaw, she continued to tumble, laugh, and make people smile. When she published her first book, One More Time, in 1986, the world saw what she had seen for the first time. She talked about how she was poor as a child during the Great Depression. She had experienced mistreatment and loneliness as a child after her father passed away in 1954. She lived in a small apartment with her grandma and barely made ends meet. She occasionally had to steal toilet paper, but she was able to escape by watching movies. She discovered her dream while seated in those dim theaters. She won 25 Emmy Awards as a result of her dream years later. At the age of 68, he shocked everyone once more in 2001. She wed guitarist Brian Miller, who was 23 years her junior. At one of her shows in 1993, they had first met. En gros. The age difference also gave gossip columns a field day, but the two disproved their claims. However, tragedy struck only 2 months after the wedding. At the age of 38, her daughter Carrie died of lung cancer. Despite Carol's grief, Brian encouraged her to complete a play they had been working on with Carrie. She was able to endure the darkest period of her life because to that type of love. She then took the stage at the Screen Actors Guild Awards in 2016 at the age of 82. Amy Poehler and Tina Fey recognized her as a trailblazer. Speaking about being told early in her career that women weren't humorous, Carol accepted the Life Achievement Award. However, she had repeatedly shown them to be mistaken. She altered comedy forever, amassed a fortune of $45 million, and made millions laugh. It felt like a silent thank you to the place where it all began when she pulled her ear, her coded communication to her grandmother. Even at 90 years old, she continued to astound people in 2023. She acknowledged in a rare interview that not pursuing more serious roles was one of her greatest regrets. In 1983, she had Declined Expressions of Endearment, a movie that eventually won an Oscar. She wished she had been more outspoken because she felt like comedy typecast her. She finally had the opportunity to play a somber and dark role in Better Call Saul, which served as a reminder to everyone of her abilities. And she continued to work in her peaceful Palm Springs home, surrounded by memories. The Carol Burnett Show memoir she wrote in 2016 went on to become a New York Times bestseller. She rewatched each episode, skipping over some scenes, laughing at others, and taking notes on everything. She won a Grammy for the audiobook of the book. She revealed wardrobe secrets, behind-the-scenes pandemonium, and even one unsettling tale of a guest who ran off the set under the influence of drugs. She turned the house in that peaceful area into her studio. She continued to pursue the next story and produced new shows far into her 90s.